Good morning, everybody. It is 4:52 p.m. It's another Wednesday. I'm recording late, but this time I'm at home. I got home, I cleaned up my whole workspace, and everything's good. And now that everything's cleaned up, I have more clarity. I can see the end of my room, and I can also see the end of my thoughts. What I've decided was that as far as the podcast goes, I'm going to stop doing these sort of recaps and projections. All right, I'm going to talk about things I want to talk about. We're going to talk about fun and interesting things. So what's really fun and interesting for me, in a really messed up way, is the problem with the Giants. Most of, if not this entire episode, is going to be a very strong, in-depth look at the New York Giants and what their problems are. Mostly because what I noticed is everybody just has different opinions. Week 1, it was players and Jason Garrett and Daniel Jones. Week 2, it was Dexter Lawrence, and it was the drop passes, which ended up putting the Giants in the position for Dexter Lawrence to have that penalty. Week 3, everybody's just killing Jason Garrett on Instagram. And all my friends can't decide. Is it Dave Gettleman's fault? Some people say yes, some people say no. I have a friend who's religiously obsessed with saying Daniel Jones is a great quarterback. And the truth is, a team isn't this bad for this long without there being a whole host of problems. There's a lot of truth to everything they're saying. So it starts from the top. There's 2 ways to do it. You can go from the bottom and go all through all the little things and then say, oh, well, it's because of this guy and ultimately this guy. No, I like to go from the top. You have an owner who's obsessed with the Giant way. The Giant is a gentlemanly organization, a very genteel organization. You treat them right, they treat you right. Dave Gettleman did a lot of work for the Giants as a head of player personnel and as a scout throughout the early 2000s before going on to become a GM for the Panthers. And he was a successful GM early, but just like he did in New York, he quickly butt heads with the personnel and with the coaches by seeming ignorant, by cutting players who have personalities, by not wanting to spend money on players, but wanting to go out of the way and load up on position groups and failing to do that. And we see these symptoms of being a bad GM with the Giants. And the whole basis for him being hired in the first place, even though he was really failing at the end of his Panthers stint, was that he's a former Giant. So what does this former Giant do? Well, his head coaching hires were both sort of know-it-all hires. First, he hires Pat Shurmur because he has to get rid of McAdoo. And it's like, okay, he's a great coordinator. He's got third-string quarterbacks going to the NFC Championship game. That's great. His last stint as a head coach, he was bad. He was bad for the same reasons now that he was then, because he didn't change. Pat Shurmur was a bad head coach because he was not personable, right? So what do you do next? Well, Gettleman goes, oh, okay. We had a non-personable, heady guy. So now we're going to go after a guy who's not exactly that smart, but still acts like a know-it-all, but he's in your face, and he gets in your face because, okay, if one thing doesn't work, got to go to the end of the spectrum. It's like the concept, okay, the Republican was bad, vote for the Democrat, vice versa, right? I'm drinking a Red Bull, by the way. I need wings. But that's the next problem, the coach. Just today, so today is 9/29/2021, write this down. Just today, he says, after a practice presser, that you don't need analytics to win football games, and if analytics won, Microsoft Excel and Bill Gates would be a great head coach. This is the same guy who has called 6 defensive timeouts in the last 2 weeks. This is the same guy whose players are getting hurt rates above the league standard, and he's claiming that the analytics are supportive of the amount of training the Giants do, which is notably more than the rest of the league. But A, why are players going to want to play if they're going to lose games when they have to train twice as hard? And B, they're training twice as hard and getting hurt at rates higher than the rest of the league, all soft tissue injuries. Of course they're going to blame that. All right, he's very quickly losing the locker room. I'm surprised Gettleman hasn't lost. I'm surprised people still choose to play for the Giants. I mean, I know we're throwing bags out left and right, but it's really bad. The Giants have not had a winning record at any point since the end of the 2016 season. They're the only team who's done that. In fact, since 2010, they are the losingest team in the NFL, despite having a Super Bowl win in that, it's really bad. The current problems that you can see evidence with the Giants are poor coaching in general. It starts with the head coach. It starts with weird challenges, unnecessarily losing timeouts, defensive timeouts because guys aren't set, which is a combination of the coordinator and the head coach. Why is that still a problem? Legitimately, the Giants have lost all their games this year because of bad coaching. When it comes with the play calling, everybody's so against Jason Garrett, and they're right to. But in Jason Garrett's defense, the offensive line is so bad that they have to run this really safe, make sure there's always 7 or 6 guys blocking for Daniel Jones so that he doesn't get killed, and even then he still gets killed at a rate higher than the rest of the league. At the end of last season and so far this season, the Giants are the lowest rated offensive line in the league, despite the fact that during Gettleman's tenure, they have spent more capital in total between cash assets on guys like Nate Solder and draft picks on guys like Andrew Thomas and Will Hernandez. They're still the worst in the league. All right, like you could theoretically, like this is a fun fact. Go through the drafts, go at the positions the Giants took offensive linemen, and then take the top 3 projected offensive linemen from an ESPN draft board. You can blind throw a dart at any of those 3 and blindly take them, and you will have built a better offensive line than Dave Gettleman has. You could, at random, do a lot of these personnel decisions and do a better job than Gettleman has. Where I'll give him credit is drafting late in rounds and drafting on defense. However, do we really credit the GM for that when we have dozens of scouts for that purpose and he's really just the head scout making the ultimate decision with the data he's given from his other scouts? No, I think the Giants have decent scouting outside of offensive line, but I think Gettleman's overriding decisions are horrible. Let's look at a few drafts, for example. 2017 Saquon Barkley draft, you take Saquon second, you don't make any effort to trade up for Lamar Jackson, even though you know Eli's on the way out. And then on top of that, you take Will Hernandez in the second round. There's so many different things you could have done there. At second, you could have taken Quentin Nelson, and you could have sat, and you could have took Nick Chubb. Would have been amazing decisions. Okay, yeah, Baker and Saquon would have ended up in Cleveland, but who cares? Seriously. That team, this Giants team, because Saquon hasn't exactly been available, and now that he has been, he's playing like he hasn't been, A, because the offensive line is bad, and B, he doesn't want to get hurt again. If the offensive line is good, it's never a problem in the first place. So many things change by adding that all-pro offensive lineman. There's been so many times where during drafts, weird decisions have been made, trading up for DeAndre Baker with his character concerns, and that all that happened with him. Dexter Lawrence has been good at 17. I mean, yeah, he lost that game, but he's been good. Taking Daniel Jones at 6 was the most arrogant thing ever. And what I will say is none of these quarterbacks after Kyler really worked out. The best quarterback taken after Kyler in that draft was Gardner Minshew in the 6th round. Okay, do you really want anything to do with Drew Lock? Do you want anything to do with Dwayne Haskins? No. Do you want anything to do with Daniel Jones? Honestly, no. The problem with Daniel Jones is everything he does well is what all the top 20 quarterbacks in the NFL can do with this big arm. He's got a great ability to move. He has a great understanding of the right and wrong place to put balls in a double coverage. But, like, I don't know, early Eli Manning, Eli Manning most of his career, those 10% of plays where it's like, what the hell is he doing? You can't do that in the NFL. At least not anymore. You can't. You cannot allow that to happen. Everything that Daniel Jones does well, every starting quarterback can do. And just because you hyper-fixate on certain stats, like my one friend, he'll go, yeah, well, Daniel Jones has been the Pro Football Focus highest-rated deep ball passer. Yeah, because the Giants never throw the ball deep. It's an efficiency stat for him at this point. It's not like he does it by volume. And on top of that, of course, it's going to be good because they never actually do it. So when they do it, defenses are like, oh, crap. But then they're like, okay, it's fine because we'll just stop them on this down and then they won't even get the field goal. So, can't be nitpicking stats. You look at the totality of Daniel Jones and you see a below-average NFL quarterback who is over-scouted and overdrafted, and most people had him as a 4th to 5th round guy, and Dave Gettleman took him 6th overall. Arrogantly. Very, very, very arrogantly. Even the decision to stick with Eli Manning the year before and not trade up for a guy like Lamar Jackson or not take a quarterback high. I mean, you could have took Sam Darnold, and Darnold's doing well outside of the Jets because the Jets are equally a dumpster fire. You could have taken Josh Allen. You could have traded back and taken Josh Allen. There's a lot of things, too, where the Giants could have traded back. The Giants could have traded back to, like, 14 or 15, and they could have taken Drew Lock. They could have taken Dwayne Haskins. It would have been just as much of a failure. Maybe not Drew Lock. Drew Lock might have been better somewhere else. I don't know. But the Daniel Jones pick was a failure. And then the next year, Justin Herbert's there. But he's not willing to admit he was wrong because, yes, Daniel Jones had like the most fumbles ever, but we let him throw the ball a ridiculous amount of time, so he had decent throwing stats if you look away from the bad ones, right? He had good positive throwing stats, really bad negative throwing stats. In fact, some of the worst ever with the fumbles and interceptions at the rate he was throwing them. And on top of that, all of his good games, yeah, he had 2 4-touchdown and 1 5-touchdown game in his rookie year. Those were all against trash defenses. And it was all at really prime, opportune times. And they lost 2 of those 3 games. So when you really look at it, passing on Justin Herbert there, big mistake. I will not say passing on Justin Fields this year was a mistake because Justin Fields looks like every Ohio State quarterback, even though I think he will be good. But the Giants don't have the roster to draft a quarterback. So how do you fix all this? Again, you have to start from the top to the bottom. You need a new GM. I would fire Gettleman now, but I'm not them. John Mara doesn't like to do that except for when Ben McAdoo benches his baby boy Eli. So we need a GM who has no former involvement with the Giants, right? We got a few guys come to mind. So somebody who made bad teams good. Rick Smith with the Texans, he stopped being their GM in 2017. That was when Bill O'Brien had his power grab, which was hilarious. I mean, it's like he brought Bill O'Brien in and Bill O'Brien took him out. Marvin Allen, the current assistant GM of Miami, he was there to watch Miami go from really bad to a decent football team. He was the head college scout for Kansas City when they drafted Mahomes, and he was a national scout for the Bills when they drafted Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds. He has been a part of 3 solid builds. I can't say Kansas City was a build. Kansas City was a retool, right? Get the quarterback, get rid of Alex Smith. But he was a part of 2 really great rebuilds. And what are the Giants right now? The Giants are a rebuild, whether you like it or not, because we have too many assets which are depreciating. I'm going to call any player over 27 with a high-value contract a depreciating asset. Think of a car. And we need a rebuild. Rebuild. That's the word. Just like hammer into your skull. Rebuild. Just keep hearing it. Just accept it. That's the problem with Giants fans. They don't accept that this team has been the worst team in football objectively in the last 5 years. Me personally, if you don't want to go for somebody who's been a GM before, I really stress that when you do go for a GM, you go for a young guy who's analytics driven. All right, I'm tired of all this. Let's get hog mollies. Let's play smash mouth football. Let's make guys work way freaking harder than they have to and way harder than the successful teams are working, right? Because, naturally, if we practice more than Kansas City, we're better than Kansas City, even though we're way worse than Kansas City, because it's not always about that. A young person who's mentally in 2021. All right, we don't need old football. Yeah, the Giants were great in the 80s. Yeah, they were... No, I can't even say anything else. Okay, yeah, they were great in the 80s, but that doesn't win anymore. Yeah, it won in 2007. It didn't win in 2011. In 2011, the Giants were a fantastic passing attack. Eli Manning had his best passing season. He had his best playoff passing performances. Victor Cruz and Hakeem Nicks combined for almost 3,000 passing yards. They actually have the most combined yards of a wide receiver duo to win a Super Bowl in that year. And they were both stellar in the Super Bowl. The NFL's gone to passing. So why are we drafting running backs second overall? Why are we getting big offensive linemen who are supposed to run block but can't even do that? It doesn't make sense. And that's the issue with the Giants, is they don't make sense. They are building their team like they're trying to play football in the early 90s, and it's 2021 where Derek Carr throws the ball 50 times a game and is leading the NFL in passing yards just because they rip it left and right all down the field. And could you really trust Daniel Jones to rip a football 50 times a game and not throw at least 2 interceptions? I don't think so. It's unfeasible. So before I get into new QB, you need a new coach. I'm really curious as to why Eric Bieniemy hasn't been hired by anybody yet. I've heard some executives say that he doesn't interview well, right? Saying that he was very general because he's taking too many interviews at once. I've heard a lot of people try and credit the team as being Andy Reid's team and he's just a name there for offensive coordinator. But in the same breath, can we talk about that for a second? Like Zach Taylor, whatever. I don't know how you pronounce that. The Bengals coach. He was a quarterback coach for 1 year under Reid. He didn't even do anything. It was like, oh, Mahomes is great. Oh, quarterback coach hire. Right? There's so many different young guys who get to hire that quick. And I'm not going to pull a Stephen A. Smith and say it's because of the way that he looks, right? Because when we see it's old white GMs hiring young white guys, and at the very least on a subconscious level, how are they going to see themselves, right? Like Jerry Jones said, I saw myself in Mike McCarthy. Where is Jerry Jones going to see himself in Eric Bieniemy, like on a physical basis, right? I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to say it's a possibility. But I'm going to say this guy does deserve a head coaching job. 100% deserves a head coaching job. Whether it's with the Giants or not, I don't know if that'll happen. Other guys are stable coordinators like Don Martindale, the defensive coordinator and former linebacker coach for the Ravens. I mean, why would you not want a Ravens defensive coordinator? Every year, the Ravens defense is good. And it's like, even if that's John Harbaugh, which it probably is from a large stance, he still hired Martindale to be a linebacker coach. The linebackers have been good since he's been there, before he was DC. He's a great coach who gives a lot of credit to his other coaches, and everybody talks very highly of him around the organization. He's very stable. Or if you want to go the proven head coach route, Doug Peterson just got fired for making sure the Giants didn't go to the playoffs, and look how that worked out for Philly. All right? They got the Heisman because they had a pick of a high enough value by throwing that game to win. And also, Doug Peterson, he didn't even really lose the locker room. Like, if those guys are really pissed, tough crap. He was a scapegoat for Howie Roseman, who is a horrific GM. Like, Dave got him in bad. I mean, if you ask me personally, GM, I would probably go with Marvin Allen. I like what he's done. I like what he's been involved in. And then even if he's bad, it's like you took a gamble that he could have been great. Not just good. Like, we know Rick Smith's good. But Marvin Allen, you gamble he's great. And he's the genius IQ guy behind a lot of these personnel decisions, or at least an influencer in them. Personally, I would hire Bieniemy. I like him a lot. And another thing is players like him a lot, right? You can get the mix of players like Joe Judge a lot, but he's really smart like Pat Shirley. Like, why wouldn't... Yeah, I guess he's a mix of all the positives of our two former coaches. It wouldn't be that different of a stretch. Like, you're not just going to go to whatever Adam Gase thought he was doing, though I guess that's what Pat Shurmur did. And with quarterback, this draft, there's always good quarterbacks in the drafts. In fact, in the last 5 years, there's really only been one draft where the quarterbacks were after the first guy, and that was Kyler Murray's draft. And then before that would be the, no, I can't say the Wentz and Goff draft. I got to say the Winston Mariota draft is probably the last truly bad quarterback draft. So we don't expect quarterback drafts to be bad anymore because they aren't. I mean, we're at a point where you can take a kid from the mountains who could throw a football 90 yards, like Josh Allen, and you could mold him into a good quarterback. So, personally, I think you're going to have 2 top 10 picks because the Bears are going to be crap and the Giants might struggle to win 3 games this year. So you're going to have 2 top 10 picks. I would argue that you trade them for Aaron Rodgers and sell your soul to do that, and then try in the next 3 or 4 years that he's still going to play to build a winning team and set it up that way. Because as soon as New York's good, people are going to come. It's a big market. It's a fun place to live. As soon as they're good, they're going to come. But not a lot of people would agree with that. But in the same breath, I'm just saying everything we've been doing so far hasn't been working. So maybe it's time to change it up a little bit. Maybe it's time to stop drafting quarterback as early as possible. Unless you think a guy is your guy. That's what I'll say. Because let's look at Cincinnati, for example. When they had the first overall pick, some people were saying, hey, why don't you move down one spot or take Chase Young and then take Hurts in the second? And Hurts right now, you know what's so funny, by the way? Last week I said that. I thought he was really good. But then very quickly I realized a little bit, like, yeah, he could be good, but he gets bailed out by his ability to run. He struggles with throwing the ball accurately, consistently. Anyways, Oklahoma system quarterback. Speaking of Oklahoma system quarterback, if Spencer Rattler declares for the draft, I'm iffy on if the Giants should go after him or not. But the Giants definitely would. That is totally a New York Giants decision to go after Spencer Rattler. But we'll see. So personally, I would say go after Aaron Rodgers. But if they draft a quarterback, of course, I'm not upset. Whoever the new GM is, whoever he wants to bring in, whoever the new coach is, whoever they want to bring in, full faith in it. I trust it. They get paid for it. I don't. But I don't trust these guys anymore because I've been proven not to. This 20-ounce Red Bull's great. I'm rattling off for 22 minutes now, and it's not even done. So what the Giants need to do is they need to blow everything up again. It sucks. It's painful. The fans don't deserve it. The players who bought into the system, like Kenny Golladay, who just signed for an ungodly amount of money, guys like him don't deserve it. The players who we draft, like Azeez Ojulari, who's been playing his heart out, freaking 3 sacks in 3 weeks. I'm so glad we got him. When I was making draft boards, I had us sitting at, what were we, 13? Yeah, I had us sitting at 13 and taking Azeez. And then the little knee issue came up, but hey man, value's there. Great pass rusher. Great weak outside linebacker. I love him. But it's not fair to those guys. But in the same breath, you have to do what you have to do. There are teams who do these full rebuilds, and it could take as early as 2 years to start seeing the results, depending on how well we do and just how conscientious we are. And I think that we also have a really good starting base for a rebuild. We have a lot of young guys. We have a lot of solid young talent. And by getting more assets and moving off contracts to, again, get more assets, we could build a roster quickly relative, like 2-3 seasons. I'm not saying do something like Jacksonville or do something like John Dorsey. You know why I didn't say John Dorsey for GM of the Giants? Because how the hell do you do that to the Cleveland fan base? Every single time you get a good player, trade it. So you get like 19 first, second, and third round picks or over a 4-year span. Or you get like 22 picks in the draft. Like, how can you do that to your fans? It's not even fun. And then guys don't even want to go and play there because they know that there's a really solid chance you'll do that again. At least if they don't think it, their agents will, because their agents want what's best for their wallet and their clients. So their wallet. But the Giants need to trade off on older players and players who are expensive or players who have an injury history. You got to get away from Leonard Williams. You're paying him way too much money, and the team's not going to be good enough in the extent of his contract. You can't keep Saquon. I'm sorry. It's like it's like you had your midlife crisis. You didn't think about how much money you needed for your bills. Now your kid's got to go to college, so you got to sell the Porsche you just bought. It sucks. You know, you want to keep the Porsche. The Porsche is nice. Porsche is awesome, but you shouldn't have bought it in the first place. Literally, it was such a dumb decision to draft Saquon, as great of a guy as he is, as great of a player as he is. From a 2017 NFL standpoint, such a bad decision. What the hell do running backs do in the NFL right now? If you're not a top 5 running back, which he is when healthy, but we don't even have the offensive line for him to do good things. There are great teams, like the 49ers always have a great rushing attack, and they never have a great running back. Raheem Mostert's not doing anything anywhere else. Maybe Trey Sermon, eventually Elijah Mitchell, but again, they're rotating 2 rookies right now, and they're still kicking ass. You can't re-sign Evan Engram. It was very apparent early on when Evan Engram was still worth a 3rd-round pick to trade off of him, but naturally we don't do the right things. At least Dave Gettleman doesn't. The next guy will. Maybe not, but you can't re-sign Evan Engram. You can't. One of the most important things is going to be rebuilding culture. And the problem is, the Giants' opinion on culture is to be like cold-hearted, to be in a respectful way, right? To be unemotional, to just play football, keep your head down, win games. And that doesn't really work anymore because the way that the Giants want to win games is by going at other teams, running at them, doing things. You can't see. I'm like shaking my head trying to think of the right words. They don't want to be the Chiefs. They don't want to be the Chargers. They don't want to be a modern team, a contemporary team. They don't want to be the team that actually throws the ball to win games. They don't want to do what you have to do in the NFL today to win games. Tom Brady's 43, throwing the ball 40 times a game. Matt Stafford is being allowed to throw the ball 30 times a game. This year, we're seeing some of the lowest rushing percentages ever. In the week one of NFL, there was a game, I forget what game, but no, it was the Buccaneers game. In the first game of the year, they ran the ball lower percentage of plays than anybody had in like 30 years. Because running the ball does not win anymore. Okay, the best running backs are guys that can run and catch. And yes, that's Saquon too, but you can't pay those guys. You can't afford to. The value is not there. Personally, I think the Giant way needs to change from the sort of Frank Sinatra, New York, Eli Manning, Phil Simms Giants. And I think that they need to become... They need to rebrand themselves, not just like literal like marketing branding, but the mentality of the team. They need to be fun. They need to be flashy. They need to embrace the fact that they're in New York City and that they are one of the most expensive franchises in sports. I'm not saying go Odell. I'm saying try and be closer to what Tom Brady's like now. He's fun. He's personable. He's more serious than everybody else, but he doesn't show it. He doesn't have to show it. Everybody just knows it. That's the problem. That's another problem with the Giants. For the last 10 years, the Giants haven't been show and tell. Not to bring up preschool, but they just tell. They don't show. What do they show? They say, "Oh, we're gonna do better next week. Oh, we know what we have to fix. Oh, we're gonna run the ball down your throats. Oh, we're gonna get hog mollies." And then they show us the worst product in football in a stretch that has been so long and so painful that it's arguably been one of the worst stretches of any non-new franchise since 1970. This is a bad team, and a lot needs to change. But the thing is, and this is the painful part, is that the roster's talented now. Like, it's really not, outside of offensive line, which has just been a joke, really. Dave Gettleman's, the amount of money he spent, the amount of picks he's put in, the amount of new guys and effort we've put into the offensive line, but the fact it's still the worst in football, it's been a joke. Outside of the joke of an offensive line, the rest of the team, it's pretty solid. So, that's why I have hope that if you decided to go a route like Aaron Rodgers, you end up trading those 2 top 10 picks, and that should be enough because Green Bay's out of their freaking mind if they think that they're going to get anything more. 2 top 10 picks in the same draft. In a draft like this, which is going to have a lot of big defense guys and big pieces, That's the way that they should go. Maybe there might be a team which will offer them like, oh yeah, we'll give you 3 firsts and a second, but they're not going to give you 2 top 10 picks right now. The present value of anything is always greater than the future value. So, with that being said, if you go after Aaron Rodgers, you're able to trade off of a couple of the higher priced aging defensive guys, or maybe even you restructure contracts. New York has money Green Bay doesn't, right? You can still pay Aaron Rodgers like $35 million a year, but over his 3-year contract, put 2 void years at the end. That's what Tampa did. That's what Dallas did. All right, we can absorb the money, and then you can go after offensive linemen. You could use your 2nd and 3rd round picks and other picks we accrued for next year, which aren't in the 1st round, to go after offensive linemen. You think Aaron Rodgers I would presume Saquon wouldn't be there. I could see the Giants re-signing him, but you think him throwing to Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, behind a, let's say, 15th ranked offensive line and pray to God that that happens. You think that that team is going to be a 4-win team? You think they're starting 0-2 for the 8th time in 9 years? No, they're not. By the way, yeah, Giants have started 0-2 every year except for 2016 since 2014, and they also did in 2012. 0-2. As soon as you start 0-2, you have under a 20% chance to make the playoffs. This has been a bad team, a bad franchise, and it's endemic. It starts with ownership and goes all the way down, and it's so painful and so detailed. You really have to look at it detailed. You have to look at every single decision which has caused this to happen. I've been talking for 30 minutes about it right now. I'm going to stop talking about it now. We're going to talk about fantasy. I love Sam Darnold this week against Dallas. All right. Everybody throws all over Dallas. Dallas has allowed 300 passing yards per game to every quarterback. No quarterback, what I meant to say was no quarterback has thrown under 300. Even Jalen Hurts threw 326, and Jalen Hurts threw into double coverage half the game. So without Christian McCaffrey, people might be fading Darnold. I would hammer down on Darnold, especially because they only have one good corner. You know, Trey Diggs can't get both Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. I'll probably get DJ Moore because Robbie Anderson, you're just going to want to have to throw doubles on Anderson. You're going to want to shadow Moore with Diggs. But I would still play Darnold. Darnold seems like a really great and solid play. Not an obvious one, right? I could say an obvious one like Joe Burrow. You know, I could say an obvious one like Tom Brady against New England. I could say an obvious one like Josh Allen against Houston. No. We're going to go for things which are a little less obvious, a little more cheeky. I would strongly expect David Montgomery to bounce back this week against Detroit. Detroit is a better team than they seem to be, and the Bears are definitely a worse team than 1-2. I mean, they should be 0-3, but you know what? I would still pick Montgomery to bounce back. He is the only thing that works on that team because Matt Nagy sure does not work to make the rest of the team win. And speaking of bounce backs, a season bounce back, I expect Jonathan Taylor to really open things up against Miami. I think that they need to control time of possession against Miami, even if Tua doesn't play, even if Brissett plays, because Indy's just been really struggling this year. They need to really rely on the run because Carson Wentz shouldn't even be playing. He's a psycho. To be playing with all that tape on his ankles, the dude can't move. But I trust Jonathan Taylor to bounce back. As an interesting flex option, I would trust Devin Singletary, despite the fact Zach Moss had more carries and did better last week. I think that against Houston, Singletary's skill set will be a little better. You know, they had to run Zach Moss more against Washington. Singletary doesn't have the size to get through that line. I think that against Houston, Singletary will do better. And onto receivers, I want to start with DJ Chark. I think that DJ Chark is going to continue to get more looks, and that is tomorrow night, by the way. So if you end up listening to this, let's see. We had 8, and then we had 14, which I predicted. I predicted 14, but then we had 0. So I don't know about that. But if anybody at all listens, we're still gonna go for gold. We're gonna go for 28 viewers. We got to keep doubling up. I think DJ Chark is a great play against Cincinnati. I think that there's too many of the same guys in Jacksonville, and it seems that DJ Chark is coming down with the balls that matter in the end zone, and he's going to keep doing that. Speaking of another guy in an offense which is really having problems, who should do well because of opportunity, Chase Claypool against Green Bay should be a solid play. Despite the fact that Ben Roethlisberger can't run and he was forced to run for his life last week, Green Bay's probably not going to do that. And Deontay Johnson will be back this week, which will probably just take more pressure off of Claypool. The best thing for Claypool is if Kevin King plays for Green Bay, and he should because he was out because of an illness, not an injury. Because let me tell you, that dude cannot play deep, and Chase Claypool plays deep. And they would obviously have Jari on Deontay. So Claypool against Green Bay seems like a really, really good play. As for players I do not like, starting with quarterback, I do not like Derek Carr. I know he's been like a fantasy gem so far. I don't like Derek Carr against the Chargers after what they just did to their division rivals. I think because it's a division game, I think because of the way the Chargers defense has been playing, that Derek Carr, just avoid him. Don't even deal with him. Despite Kansas City's recent bad defense, I also don't like Jalen Hurts. I'm not too impressed with him, and I think that if there's a game Kansas City bounce back on the defensive side of the ball, it would be against Philly, especially with their newfound offensive line injuries. And last, for fantasy purposes, I don't like Lamar Jackson against Denver. I know that Denver is 3-0 against 0-9 teams, but it's not a recipe for good things to happen, Lamar versus Denver, so I would just avoid it. And look, I will say this, he can play well. He really can. It's a personal feel thing, the way Denver's playing and the way that the Ravens played last week against Detroit. I would fade Daryl Henderson against Arizona just because he's coming back from injury, and Arizona's defense is a little on the better than expected side, especially their defensive line. They got the veteran edges, and that seems to be going great for them. DeAndre Swift against Chicago, somebody else who I would pass on. Just he's gonna get his looks, but a division game away, Chicago's defense is their lone bright spot. I don't like that. Not to mention that Detroit will have a good time, an easy time anyways, throwing the ball on Chicago, and Chicago should have a much better time throwing the ball against Detroit. I don't see this as being a game where Detroit is going to succeed running often. I would fade the fantasy flex darling Chuba Hubbard at Dallas. Dallas's defensive line is a little on the underrated side, but just because Mike Davis was good with Carolina last year doesn't mean Chuba Hubbard is. I mean, that's a hilarious name. I'm kind of rooting for him, but I don't believe it for fantasy purposes. For wide receivers, I would just start by fading Odell Beckham and not looking back. Coming back from injury, the way Cleveland's probably going to play against Minnesota will be a little more run heavy. Odell might not get that many looks, let alone however he's going to look when he gets them. I would fade Mike Williams against Vegas. I think that this is going to be a week where they're going to put a lot of pressure on Herbert to throw the ball quick, and Williams' deep ball acumen, and plus the fact that they're probably going to have him double a lot anyway since he's been their wide receiver one so far. I would fade Mike Williams. I might actually be competing for biggest Mike Williams Hater of the Year award. I just traded him in fantasy in a trade which involved Tyreek Hill, and if you go by pure numbers through 3 weeks, it looks like I'm an idiot, and maybe I am. We'll definitely see, but I'm just saying I don't see him keeping it up. Why now? Why at this point in his career, just right now, would he just become great? It's a few week stretch. A lot of guys have good stretches, and that's that. I wouldn't even think about it. I am definitely fading any Giants wide receiver until further notice. Just forever, probably, actually. Up until 2023, probably fading every Giants wide receiver. And my last fade is going to be Mike Evans. There's just too many mouths to feed in that offense, and in a game against the Patriots defense, the odds are the ball's going to be going to guys who are a little more trustworthy and a little less 1v1 oriented. So I would expect Godwin to have a good game. I would expect Gronk to continue playing well. I would expect Antonio Brown to have a good game. I just don't expect Mike Evans to be involved in that. It's probably going to be a really fun game to watch, because Tampa's going to beat the brakes off of New England. Poor Mac Jones. He's not going to know what hit him. And with that, I'm going to end the episode. I've been talking in a lot more calm tone today than normal. It's because I'm in my house with my family's around. I don't want to be yelling. I don't want to have people thinking, what is he doing down there? I'm also not in my car. I get more excited just sitting in my car. I don't know why. And thirdly and finally, I just didn't want to get too heated about the Giants. I have a rest of my day I have to live. And by getting mad about the Giants, I can't do it. So there's that. And yes, this will only be on YouTube. As you can probably figure, I still do not have the free Seton Hall podcast software, the Podbean account. Don't know why, don't know how, don't know when. It's been 3 weeks now. I should probably hit them up. I don't know if I will. I probably will. They told me they'll tell me as soon as they know, but if they never know, how are they going to tell me, So I'll have to figure that out. Apply a little pressure, a little elbow grease. But have a good day. I hope that everybody except for Dave Gettleman has a good day.